All right, so it's all about the network. Remember when we went over the objectives that about 20% of your test is going to talk about getting things on a network, devices, nodes, workstations. Now, does that mean get everything online? Not necessarily. When we think about networks, we always think about getting to the internet, getting online. But that's not necessarily what makes up a network. It's any two devices that are communicating and passing data back and forth. So let's jump into our slideshow and talk about what is a network and how do we make all this good stuff work. So the first thing that we're going to want to look at is really not just our network, but how we're going to secure those things as well. So most of this you will be completely familiar with already in regards to the network types, different components that make up a network, common services that we're looking at. Now the cloud is one that we will definitely spend some time on because the cloud is where all of our information is being stored, with the exception of our personal information from hospitals and some Department of Defense and other government agencies. Everything else is pretty much held in the cloud. If you've ever had a device fail on you and you wanted to get your data back, if it was in the cloud, you were okay, and if it wasn't, you were probably just completely out of luck because that data was gone. And then one of the most important parts, and where all the money is nowadays, is how to secure all this good stuff. So let's make it happen. So what is a network? And that's one of the first things we talked about in regards to just getting things to talk to each other. As you can see here, there's no internet involved. We've got 3 workstations or end users and what looks to be a printer, maybe an all-in-one device. None of those are connected to the internet from what we can tell from this graphic. Does that mean that they're not on a network? Not at all. That means the exact opposite. There are 2 or more devices that are sending information to each other. That means they are network devices. So we've got a network established. What's the next part of that? Well, there's 2 different ways to actually make this happen: client server and peer-to-peer. Now, when most of us listen or think of a peer-to-peer model, we're thinking about old Napster, right? LimeWire, file sharing that wasn't necessarily the best way to share or acquire files. But that's exactly what a peer-to-peer network is and looks like. We still have some legal ways to implement that today. And that's whenever, honestly, we're just sharing files between each other. But client server is the most secure, the most manageable, and the most common in a business environment today. And that means we have a centralized server that is really managing all the coordination and communication between our workstations as far as file and data transfer. Now, does that have to be a huge server rack with all different kinds of pieces in it? Not necessarily. Not all the components and devices that you think of in your normal server rack are required to create a client-server relationship. That just means one computer is acting as the manager or coordinator for all of this communication. So in a client server, you have a more manageable environment and what can be a more secure environment, as long as somebody knows what they're doing when they set it up. And that's what you're here to learn. In a peer-to-peer environment, it might be a little bit more, let's say, decentralized, because there's no center point of administration. And it may be more convenient at one point, but it's a lot less organized. So be careful when you implement a peer-to-peer model. So let's talk about what is a LAN, local area network. This is multiple workstations, networked devices in a single area. So it can be on a single floor of a building. It might be the whole building, depending on if your business takes up all of the suites or all of the floors. But it's going to be a smaller area, something that you can wire connect multiple devices together or in the same centralized geographical space. Now, I'm careful on how I actually explain that, because when we talk about different size networks is probably one of the most important things we're going to go over. And that's because more than one LAN, local area network, makes up what we call a WAN, or a wide area network. We also have different size networks that will talk about different geographical areas that they cover. Now, WANs, wide area networks, can span the entire globe. They might just be on different sides of a state or different parts of a single country, or maybe in two different countries. But as long as you have two or more local area networks and you connect them, you now have a wide area network. So LAN and WAN. And these are concepts and acronyms that you will hear often. So make sure you're comfortable with those. And we'll talk about bigger and smaller area networks per se, but these are the two that you're going to come across, like I said, the most often. These are the most common, not only in your testing area, but in real life as well. So when you're in an IT position, this is what you're going to see, and these are the things that you're going to be working with. All right, LANs and WANs. So what is it that we're looking at when it's just us, just a single person? Well, that thing is called a PAN. Yes, you yourself are a PAN administrator. That means you are in charge and working out all of your personal devices, and that makes up a personal area network. That's your phone, your Bluetooth, your smartwatch, your at-home computer, whether it's a laptop or a PC, your printer, your anything in your personal area makes up your personal area network. And that is one of the smallest networks that we can establish outside of an ad hoc point-to-point network. But this is just you. This is just the stuff that's around you, whether you're at home or you're mobile. So even when we're in our car, we have a personal area network that's active. We usually have our phone, and that might be connected to our car itself. It might be connected to a Bluetooth headset or a watch or wearable of some kind. So personal area network, something you may see on your test, something you already are participating in 24 hours a day in real life. But as far as business is concerned, again, the LAN and WAN are the two primary parts. Now there's this thing called a MAN, and that is a metropolitan area network. That means I have more than one LAN, two or more, in the same city. And so this is why I say I'm very careful about talking about a geographical area, because some people will consider this to be just multiple LANs, not yet a WAN because they're not far enough apart. Some people do consider this a wide area network because the LANs are separated. But there's a technical term for it, and you may have not heard of it, but as long as you have two or more local area networks in the same metropolitan area, that means that you have a metropolitan area network. So the last one I want to talk about, and there's not even a slide for it, is CAN, a campus area network. Now that is going to be when you have multiple buildings in different sections of your network in the same place. They may be across the street from each other. There might be multiple buildings that are next to each other, but think about a typical or traditional college campus that has multiple buildings that are pretty much all connected network-wise. That thing is called a CAN, campus area network. So now that we have all these different types of networks, some are big, some are small, some are two or more of a certain type of network, I want to know what is the best way to connect to them, even if you're not physically there. Well, first, we got to get a VPN going. And what is a VPN anyways? A virtual private network is what allows us to connect securely over the internet to a network, even if we're not necessarily physically there. So if you want to work from home, or what they call remote in, you're probably going to be using a VPN. This is going to allow us to build a secure tunnel so that we can throw information through back and forth. So we can sit at home and we can access files from work or from a certain, pretty much anywhere to be honest in the world, without having to be on or attached to the network that those files are on. So this is a great way to increase making life easier, right? So it's Comfort, decreasing the cost. A lot of times people can work from home, but can work from different states or different countries and still access things. And a great way to implement this is between different office buildings that are far apart. So if I need to access resources from my office in California and I'm sitting in my office in New York, I can VPN into my California location and get those files without having to interrupt anybody else's workflow or get on a flight and fly across the country and do my work there and then return to where I was originally. So VPNs are beautiful things, and they're one good step in creating a secure connection from point A to point B, no matter where you are. So there's a lot of different devices that we use to make a network happen, to get everything up and running. When we talk about switches and routers, I want you to think layer 2 and layer 3 of the OSI model. And we have not talked about the OSI model yet, but we will spend some time on that, as well as the TCP IP model. And you'll see why these things are all so important, as well as connected. So a layer 1 device is a hub. And we talked about hubs a little bit in regards to what does a hub do? So if you remember, a hub is literally going to send information to everything that it's connected to. The smarter version of that is a layer 2 device that we call a switch. And a switch is going to send information to the direct recipient or the intended recipient. Kind of like a piece of mail that goes directly to you versus those ads that go in everybody's box. So when we use a switch, this is your piece of mail and it's only going to come to your inbox. Now, a router is a layer 3 device on the OSI model, and layer 3 is all about getting on the network and out of our own network, meaning I can access other networks, including the internet. So a layer 3 device is a router, and routers depend on IP addressing to make sure it can keep all of its devices straight. And it's what enables us to communicate outside of our own network with other devices and other people. So here's a breakdown of some of our legacy devices. So a hub is considered a legacy device. Even though we still have some in use today, and you do need to know what it is and be familiar with it, just know that it's not something that we're really implementing as a new device anymore. Bridges are older versions of switches, and we've had the upgraded full-blown versions now. So switches are much smarter devices and they can handle more than bridges. The last one you see here is a repeater. Now repeaters again are older devices, but we use them all the time. If you're one of those people that has a cell phone company that for some reason it just doesn't work in your house, or it works on one side of your house but you can't get any signal when you go to the other side. One of the ways to fix that, and they probably offered to send you a free piece of equipment that you can plug in, is a repeater. You can use this for if your Wi-Fi signal does not reach to the other side of your house, or maybe it doesn't reach upstairs or downstairs as well. In business, we use these to make sure that we have the same signal throughout a large section of a building. So when you're at the airport and you walk down a terminal, even though that terminal might be really long or you might walk a very far distance, you're still connected to the same network, and that's possible because we have repeaters. So let's go in depth to switches and routers, because these are the two most important pieces of equipment in getting our enterprise level networks online. So on your slide, you can see that this is a what kind of network? Peer-to-peer or client server? So hopefully you said client server, because you'll see one computer acting per se as the server as far as the icons here in the upper left-hand corner. And you see 4 other end stations or workstations where everything is connected to a switch. So our switch is our centralized network device that is taking data and sending it from the server to a specific workstation. And it looks like there's a request from that workstation getting sent to the server. It's either a request or a response of some kind. But when that piece of data, which is represented by the little silver bar, is being sent, it's only communicated to the 2 devices that are trying to have that session or that conversation. If this was a hub, that piece of data would be blasted out or broadcasted to everything that's connected to the hub. But because this is a switch, only those two devices are having to deal with any of that data. That decreases the amount of traffic on our network and makes life just a lot easier. Now, when we implement a router, that means we can actually have all of the devices in our network communicate with devices outside of our network. So you'll see it divides our network based on network addresses, and those are IP addresses or Internet Protocol addresses. So we all know kind of what an IP address is and what it does, but at its absolute core, it's an identifier for our time on that specific network. So when you're at home, you have an IP address, but when you pack up your laptop and take it to work or school, you have a different IP address for that new network that you've connected to. And it may be very different from the IP address you had the last time that you were in that same place. Just depends on how the network is set up. So laptops and phones and PCs, tablets, as soon as we're on the network and we connect via a router, we have an IP address, but how does all that wireless signal make it from point A to point B, and honestly from A to Z, because there's a lot of different devices that it's going through? Well, all of that happens with an access point. Access points, specifically wireless access points, allow us to get our connection between any and all wireless devices that can connect to it. And then our access point is actually hardwired behind the scenes and connects to a switch and a router to get all that data that you're sending back and forth. So when you're watching this video and you're on a wireless laptop, your laptop is actually connected wirelessly to an access point of some kind. That access point is then sending the data to your router through however many devices are in between. If you're at home, this is all taking place in the router that you have. But if you're at work, there are quite a few different options on how this can work as far as how much hardware you have at work for you to get online. So we talked a little bit about repeaters, and this is just some more in-depth information on how this works. The whole purpose is to regenerate the signal to make sure that you have a good or high signal strength over whatever distance needs to be traveled. So maybe you have a repeater just in your home so that you can get stronger signal in all sides of your house, or you're walking through a huge business building and they have repeaters everywhere so that you can get onto that network no matter what corner or floor of the building that you're on. So modems, and I say it a little weird for a reason. Modem stands for modulate, demodulate. That's actually where the word comes from. So what the heck is that, and why are we looking at little squigglies all over our screen? Well, analog signals are waveforms, meaning that they're formed from an inconsistent signal that goes up and down like a wave. Digital form, however, digital signals are very concrete. They're either ones or zeros. There's no gray area. It either the signal is on or off. That's why in our older TVs, especially with antennas, you could move the antenna around and get a better signal, but it might be kind of fade out. But even behind the snow, you could still see the TV show. But now, if your signal goes out from your cable company or your satellite company, what's on your screen? Nothing at all. It'll say no signal, or it'll just go completely black and there's nothing there. And that's usually the easiest way to describe the analog versus digital signal. But when we're transferring data, we need to have a way to translate that from our waveform analog to our ones and zeros, or on and offs, which are digital. And that's what a modem does for us. It translates both directions. It modulates and demodulates our signal. So we talked a little bit about a firewall, and from your first quiz, you were able to literally get the best definition of what a firewall does. Now, not all firewalls have to be hardware. Some of you that have had an IT position know that there's a physical firewall that's been configured and sitting in a rack server somewhere. But for us at home that haven't seen this, this is probably something that you think of only being software, meaning that Windows has told you it's blocked something and Windows Defender has come to your rescue in not allowing a certain website to communicate with your computer. Well, it can be software or hardware. And the bigger your enterprise solution or the bigger your business, the more likely that you'll actually have both. All a firewall does is scan incoming and outgoing information to make sure that it passes preset rules. And those rules are going to be different on every network. A system administrator or a security administrator of some sort will set those rules. Maybe you have certain websites that are blocked, or it's just an overall content provision, meaning that they don't want you to see any websites that have certain types of content. There's lots of different rules that you can set, and there's different ways to set them, but that all depends on your organization and the manufacturer of the firewall itself. So patch panels should first and foremost look like this, and not the mess that it probably has looked like at some point you've worked in the past. For those of you entering IT, you will come across patch panels and server rooms that look like a very messy bowl of spaghetti. But this picture is nice and organized and the way it should all be. And this is where a ridiculous amount of cables and data come together and are organized to make it to their final destination. So when you plug in your computer workstation to the wall, where does all that good stuff go? Well, behind that RJ45 plug is a wire, and the wire goes through the wall and up around the ceiling and around some corners, and it makes it to a patch panel. And this is what allows us to literally patch all that information from, let's say, maybe your section or your floor of the building and connect it with all the other floors of the building. So at some point in our server room, everything can go together. And what kind of servers are we using? What are these things connecting to? Well, those are the best questions you can have. And here's the slide that's going to provide you with some of the answers, but not all of them. There are different types of servers, and each of them will play a different role, meaning that they're hosting, communicating, or providing different information to you. A web server is going to have websites on it. Website content is going to be held on a web server. Well, that's all fine and good, but what about your email? Or what about all my files? Where are those being held? Well, different servers are for different things. What I want to concentrate here on are your DHCP and DNS servers. Now, you probably have not come across these acronyms in the past unless you've already been in IT. And that's great, because even for those who have been in IT for a little bit, you're still usually getting this part wrong as far as what the official definition or what the book version is of both of these things. So DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And we will talk more about this in future chapters. But what I need you to know at its very core is this is a server that provides all of the information that you need to get on the network. When you first boot up your computer, you do not have an IP address and you have no idea where the router is. And when I say you, I actually mean your system. Your system needs those numbers to be able to get on the network and start communicating. And DHCP is going to pretty much take care of all of that automatically behind the scenes, so you don't have to concern yourself with it. Now, DNS is your domain name system. And this is what makes life so easy for us, because when you go to a website, do you type in an IP address or do you type in a domain name? You probably type in something like google.com, facebook.com, imittraining.com. But at the end of the day, those are all going to equal IP addresses, a whole bunch of numbers that you do not want to memorize. And DNS lets us get away with only using our domain names. It's what's responsible for translating all of our domain names to IP addresses. So when we're happily typing away all these different websites that we want to go to, DNS is going to take that request. It's going to match the domain name with the assigned IP address, and then it's going to put out an IP address request onto the internet. And when the response comes back saying, here's 8.8.4.4, which is a real IP address, by the way, then you'll get the response from what 8.8.4.4 is. And to be honest, just to let you know for fun, that IP address is one of the 2 DNS servers for Google. So in case yours isn't working, you can actually reroute your configuration to that IP address as a backup. So we talked about getting this set up, but now I need to know how to secure it. And IDS and IPS are 2 of your best options in your front line of defense for securing your network. So an IDS is intrusion detection system. Anytime somebody's trying to jump onto our network, maybe they're hacking our network or they're scanning something and they shouldn't have access to, this is what's going to let us know, hey, take a look at this, something's happening. And that's all fine and good, and I'm glad that there's something out there to let me know that something's going on in my network that I should be looking at. But what if I want to take the next step and actually implement something that stops whatever this bad thing happening is? Well, that's an IPS. That's an intrusion prevention system. So there's 2 ways you can look at this. Have you ever seen the commercial where the bank is getting robbed and the security guard says, "We're getting robbed," and he does nothing about it because he's a monitor? He doesn't do anything. Well, that's what an IDS is. It'll tell you that your data is being robbed, but it won't do anything to stop it. An intrusion prevention system will actually take those steps to stop whatever's happening. Now, it may not be successful every time, but it's one more step that you should be putting into place to protect yourself and your data. Now at the bottom you see UTM, and that's not a specific thing, but that's all the things that we're implementing to protect ourselves. So Unified Threat Management is UTM, and that's, like I said, the bullet points of all the things. Do you have firewalls in place? Do you have anti-malware software in place? Do you have an IDS or IPS? Also, we're taking a look at some of the physical things that we have in place. Do you have a lock on your server rack or your server room? Do you have a lock on the door? Are there gates around your facility? These are all the things that we're doing to protect ourselves. So just a quick reminder here that legacy equals old. It's not a bad word, but that legacy also doesn't mean that it's not around anymore. So we do still learn about the older stuff that is IT related. So if you're looking at your screen now, you see a floppy disk, probably not something you've touched in a very long time. MS-DOS overall, not a screen that you interact with on a regular basis, but you still have to be familiar with what's going on. And if for some reason you still need to tap into some old software or use old hardware and storage mediums, well, there's ways to do that. And in IT, as a tech, we have to be prepared as best as we can to handle not only new, trending, awesome toys, but all the old stuff as well. So let's talk about embedded. We've only talked about this word maybe once or twice so far, but it's an important word in understanding the difference between something that is permanently affixed versus something that is removable. So embedded means that it is attached to your system permanently on your motherboard. It is stuck there. It is not coming off of it. Some chipsets and some cards are actually embedded, and you'll find this more often in laptops and smaller customized systems like game systems or home theater PCs. When you get into your bigger computers, your supercomputers, you'll find that most things are not embedded because you want to be able to customize and upgrade them. So now that we've talked about old stuff and we've talked about hardware for our network, where is the place that we're saving all of our data? Most commonly, you're going to see it in the cloud. So do you interact with the cloud every day? Is it something that you're familiar with as implementing it, to be honest, or is it just something that you use as an end user? So this is an important difference because there are different types of clouds. And what I mean by different types of clouds is there are different as-a-service options. And you've probably heard of software as a service or infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. Well, there's different things as a service, and they are all cloud-based. And this is where we are moving to in our future of IT. So the three primary as-a-service options that you need to familiarize yourself with are infrastructure, platform, and software. Now, each of those are going to be a little bit different in regards to what we're depending on, but they're stacked. What I mean by that is that if we're using a software as a service, we are not doing anything at all as an end user in regards to hosting the requirements. We didn't create the software itself. We're not physically holding the information. We're not maintaining it. We're doing nothing but using it. We're a consumer. When you log into your email program over the internet, so Gmail or Yahoo Mail or whatever it may be, you did not program that system. You are not hosting that in a virtual space or the hardware used to host not only the software, but the mail servers to keep track of all that stuff. So you're using that software as a service. So let's say you're a little less dependent. So let me say you don't want to maintain the hardware required to hold on to a bunch of information, and you don't want to write a program from scratch, but you want to take somebody's template or something that already exists, and then you'd like to customize it for your own use. Well, that is platform as a service, meaning that you don't take care of the hardware part, but you're going to do some of your own customization and do some of your own hosting and configuration. Well, let's say you want to do all of that, and let's move down to the next level with infrastructure. You want to create your own app. You want to write your own code, develop your own program. You want to use somebody else's hardware, but you're going to use it for your own thing, and you don't need anybody else's input. Then you're using infrastructure as a service. So you want to pretty much rent somebody's space, their physical rack space, and some of their digital space, maybe a few gigs or maybe even a few terabytes. And you really only want to pay for what you use. Well, infrastructure as a service at that point is for you. You're just letting somebody maintain the hardware part so that you can focus on all the software and development, as well as getting all that stuff out there so other people can use your software as a service. Now, if you understood all of that, I'm absolutely proud of you. But I know personally, it took me a little bit more to understand the differences of those things. And this is where I'm going to tell you, on your Google wall, there is a link that goes to two things. One, a picture or graphic that's going to help you understand the differences between these three and includes really cool examples. And that's again posted on your Google wall under all the links that were included for the day one of course material. The other link that's going to be posted along with this is a short article that explains the difference between these three. So that's one of those frequently asked questions that we definitely get a lot, and that's because there's a lot of information here. Now, if you understand the surface level, you will get through your test. But the purpose of this is for you to understand beyond just answering the question, but being able to understand this and explain it to someone else and eventually be able to administer a cloud platform yourself. So take a look at those links and you'll understand more about it. All right, so with that being said, how does the cloud work and who has access to it? And what are the benefits to all of this? Well, there's three different kinds of clouds, and we want to say pretty easy to understand too. Private means that you own it and nobody else touches it. You manage it, you host it, and everything is internal. We're not talking about just posting stuff to Google Drive. We're talking about hosting this in-house. That means private. Now, public is the opposite. This is that free cloud space that you originally had probably with Dropbox, and then you filled up your Dropbox and you moved over to Google Drive, or Microsoft has OneDrive. So there's lots of options, and these are open, cloud-based, accessible from anywhere clouds. That's the public cloud. Now, Community Cloud is probably something that you have not heard of yet, but it's very important to understand that it's the most efficient way for small or medium businesses to implement a cloud into their business structure. And what this allows is for multiple organizations to come together and share cloud space. Why would anybody want to do that? Well, think of building a bicycle. Maybe I build bicycle frames and you build bicycle brakes and somebody down the street builds bicycle seats. It would be beneficial for us to maybe pool our resources together and all sign up for some shared cloud space. That doesn't mean I'm having to share my files. That does not mean that I'm having to share all my secret data, but we're coming together to pool our resources and have a shared area where we can share some of our data and our files and ideas, and we can also have some places where we store data without necessarily sharing. But it makes it less expensive and really brings people in a certain community that have common interests together. Now, as far as hybrid, it's literally any two or more of these combined, meaning that if I have a private cloud in my own company, but I hire a third-party company to manage it for me, that makes it part private, part community, or part private, part public. So if I'm implementing two or more of these, I have a hybrid cloud. So the benefits to all of this are amazing, and that's why the cloud is becoming so popular. If you need more space, you can get it. If you don't want to use as much space as you were before, you don't have to pay for what you don't use. So subscriptions and on-demand services are amazing. The other thing is I can get to this 24 hours a day. Data into the cloud, I can get to it on my phone, I can get to it on my laptop, I can get to it on my tablet, I can get to it at work or home or at the coffee shop. Doesn't matter where I am or what device, as long as I have network access, I can get to my cloud. Resource pooling, again, for that community cloud is awesome. But even overall, if you're using a public cloud, you're able to really only use what you need, and you can have a ridiculous amount of customers using the same service, and one customer's information doesn't have to overlap with another customer's information, meaning that we can all put up little walls and only use as much as we need to and never have to share. Service part is a subscription-based part, meaning if I use a certain amount of billable space, meaning I have contracted with a company and said I want to buy, a terabyte of space to save things on the cloud, I'm only going to get billed for that terabyte. And when I'm ready to jump to 2 terabytes, I can do that. And if I need to reduce the size of what I'm using, you might be able to actually always host your stuff for free. There are a lot of platforms that are going to give you a good amount of space to save your data in the cloud. So is this safe? Well, that depends on what service you go with, especially when we talk about our private clouds within a company. Each corporation needs to have what they call a security policy, meaning who has access to the cloud? How does someone gain access? When do they lose access? What their password has to be, or if they're needing to use biometrics or a physical token of some sort to gain access to this cloud information. There is going to be a different policy for every company, but there are usually some pretty common trends here. You need to have a strong password, and your password is going to have to change on a regular basis. And you're going to have to, of course, be a current employee to gain access to the cloud and the network itself. So what is a strong password? How long do you think your password should be? Let me ask a more specific question. In IT, as far as security professionals go, what is considered, or how many characters do you need to be considered a strong password? I will definitely give you a second on that because it is a very specific answer. Well, the answer is 17 to 22 characters. You probably said 8 or 12, maybe even 15, but the real answer now is 17 to 22 is average. But not only how many characters, but what kind of characters. So of course we have upper and lowercase letters. We've got all of our numbers, but we've got special characters as well. And you'll notice that the more things you hear on the news about hacking and cyber attacks and all of those crazy things, the longer and more intense your passwords need to be for random systems that you are accessing. I know that there are some systems, even at this point, that I have to have a 10 to 15 digit or character password, and I'm having to change it every 30 days, which is really annoying, but I've never had an access issue with those. It's only the places where I can set a really short, simple password and then leave it forever where I seem to have issues. So do yourself a favor, pick a stronger password than you have now, and start putting it in the places that you use most. And don't use the same password everywhere. Once I guess your Facebook password, I have access to your whole life, including your bank. So what are we doing right now? Well, hopefully you're absorbing some educational material. And this is important not only for you, but everyone around you in IT. The further you get into your career, the more things you'll notice that people just don't think about. They don't know to think about it. They've never had to consider it before. So making sure that the people around you are aware of what can happen and help them understand how to prevent it from happening, meaning remind the person that's in their workstation or their cubicle to take their password off of the sticky notes that they have on their monitor, right? Because that's not the best way to keep your stuff secure. But what I think happens a lot of times, especially in bigger corporations, is that we don't really have a great way to communicate. Meaning that if I see someone doing something wrong, who do I tell exactly? Do I tell their manager that's their best friend? Do I tell the HR person? They don't want to hear it necessarily. Do I send something directly to IT? Do I even want to tell anybody at all? So you want to make sure that as you're investing in education, not only in yourself, but in your end users, and you will come across hundreds of end users that have something, whether it's a suggestion or a concern, that they want to communicate and they just don't know who to communicate it to. Creating clear lines of communication is important in the overall IT aspect so that we can keep our network secure. So with that being said, you are going to be a tech. You already are a tech, to be honest, as you sit in this class and you learn things. Well, what does that give you access to? Are you the chief information officer or the CIO now? Probably not quite yet. Are you the tier 4 escalation lead? Probably not yet. So how much access do you need in your current position? Well, I would say the least amount to get your job done successfully. Meaning that if you don't need access to the server room, then you probably shouldn't have access to the server room. But let's not talk about just you. Let's talk about normal end users who aren't necessarily on the tech team. If you have a customer support representative, do they need access to the accounting department's files? Nope, not at all. If you're in the marketing department, do you need access to human resource files? Probably not. So having some controls in place to make sure that people don't have access to where they don't need to go will help on two different fronts. One, it helps you as an IT person keep your information secure and organized. On the employee side that has limited access, well, this just stops them from getting themselves in trouble. Because if I don't give them access to things that they're not supposed to look at, it is unlikely that they'll go find a way to get there. So giving somebody the least amount of access or privileges to complete their job successfully is one great way to keep things organized and secure. Now, you don't want to take away so much access that somebody cannot do their job. Just give them an IT ceiling or an access ceiling per se, so they can't get to where they shouldn't be going. So there are different things that we need to consider when we're securing our data. Most of us think about viruses and hacking, and that is a concern, but there's lots of other things going on. physical security is a huge deal, meaning can somebody literally walk into our building and just grab the USBs or our backup files, or maybe even grab a laptop or cell phone and walk out and then have access to a bunch of data? We want to make sure that we're keeping our physical security top of mind. So if somebody can't get into the parking lot in the first place, maybe they need some type of parking pass. When they come in, do they meet a security guard or some type of man trap, meaning that they have to scan a badge or prove themselves before they gain access to the facility? Once they're in, maybe it's a current employee. Do they need access to everywhere in the building or just their department? So think about those things as you implement different access rules. Device security is just as important. Do you send your employees home with cell phones? Do those cell phones have network access? Do you have laptops at every workstation? And how do you know that those laptops don't walk off and not make it back to work the next day? So think about how to make sure that all of your devices are where they're supposed to be and make sure they can't get stolen. Social networking is the hardest thing to secure. If you are in a restricted access area, taking selfies with the brand new cool technology that nobody's supposed to know about is not the best way to keep your job. But this happens all the time. I will never get over the summer that Pokemon Go was a huge deal. And I was teaching classes at a Department of Defense facility, meaning there was a whole bunch of guys in the military and ladies from amazing positions way up in the Department of Defense. And all too often at lunch every day, somebody would be staring at their phone and walking headfirst into a fence of a restricted area that you had to have a clearance to even see what was in a certain building. And they were taking pictures of it with their phone, trying to catch Pokemon. And then that really started encouraging them to say, oh, well, that's cool. Let me take a picture of it. Let me post it on different social networking sites. And it just became an absolute mess. So I'm sure that you have at least know one person that has posted something inappropriate that's work related on their social networking sites of some sort. Make sure it's not you. And if you're in IT, how do you combat other employees posting things that they shouldn't be, whether they're corporate secrets or certain types of hardware or processes or just general information that you don't want shared? So keep that in mind when you create your policies as far as your security policies and what people are allowed to and not allowed to do. Of course, your system security is at the top of this cyclical pattern and practices here because we want to make sure that we have everything in place to secure our system, hardware and software wise. And we will take a in-depth look at how you authenticate to get access to these things and different policies that you can put in place, different software you can put in place, as well as different hardware to protect your system security when we get into the more the security chapters. So when we talk about authentication, what in the world does this mean? Well, for A+ at this level, there are 3 types of authentication. It is something that you know, your username, your password, your mother's maiden name, your first dog, your first job in high school, whatever that may be. There is something that you are, meaning your thumbprint, your retina scan, maybe your signature, voice recognition, but these are biometrics. And something that you have, your physical ID, maybe a proximity card that you use to scan to get into something, a credit card, a library card, anything that's physically tangible that you can produce, that someone can touch. These are 3 different authentication methods. If you choose to use more than one of those methods to have somebody authenticate, meaning prove themselves, that means you're using multi-factor authentication. So let's take a moment quickly and ask just a few questions. If I ask you for your username and your password, is that single or multi-factor authentication? Well, single factor is correct because I did ask you for 2 pieces of information, but they both came from something you know, meaning that only one factor was used. I could actually ask you for your username, your password, your mother's maiden name, your birth date, your social security number, your address as a kid, on and on and on. As long as it's only things that you know, it's single factor. So let me ask you a different question. If I asked you for your employee ID and what seat number you were at the game, how many factors have I asked you for? Well, those are two. That's your employee ID is something that you have, and what seat you're in, whether it's at the game or if you're assigned a seat at work or maybe what department you're in, those are things that you know. So that's multi-factor authentication because I'm using two or more. If you go to work and you have to prove yourself by not only getting into the building with your employee ID, whether it's a proximity card or just a picture, as well as having to enter a PIN number to a certain door or a password of some sort, that means you're using multi-factor authentication to gain access. Now, mutual authentication is the last one listed here, and that's for anytime you have two or more parties coming together, meaning that I'm going to have a meeting today, and I'm going to show up, and you're going to show up. Now, I'm from IM IT training, and you are from your company. Now, before I can start training you, before you have access to this video, we're going to verify that you are the one that's supposed to be here. Meaning I need to know your email address, or you need to actually have access to this link that provides the video content. So we're going to authenticate to each other. You might have a question for me to ask, who are you? Are you really the person that's teaching this class? And I may have some questions for you, like who are you? And are you sure that you're the student that signed up? We need to authenticate to each other before we can start the session. Now, that's all fine and great if we could verbally do that or just trade like a quick text message to make sure that happens. But when we need to do that digitally, I want to make sure that we have a way to pass that information along in a secure way. And if I asked you what your email and your password was to log into your YouTube account, well, you might want to hesitate on giving that to me, right? Especially if it's in clear text or not encrypted, because that's not my information to have, and you don't want to just send that good stuff out. But if I ask you to just log into your YouTube, you would send those credentials over to Google, and you'd be able to log in to watch all this good stuff. So how do I send things, any data, without it being clear text? Well, that's where encryption comes in. So whenever I encrypt something, that means that it's not going to be sent in what we call either clear text or plain text. If my password is ABC123, which I promise it's not, then I can just send that over a system, over my network in clear text, and anyone can see that. Anyone can jump into that session, look at the data I'm sending, and they would all have my password. However, if I encrypted my password before I sent it, that means somebody will see it, but they'll see a completely different character string. Meaning instead of ABC123, they might see XYZ567. Now, is XYZ567 my password? Nope, not at all. But that's what they would see if that was the encrypted result of my plain text password. So this is kind of a simple thing, but encryption can get really, really complex. And until you get to Security Plus, you do not need to worry about different types of encryptions, these specific algorithms, or how we implement it. But you do need to understand that simple things are pretty much hidden or masked behind other characters. So the last thing that we're concerned about is malware. Now, not the last thing ever, but the last thing for this chapter. So malware is malicious software. Anything that is going to cause us an issue or just be a nuisance in general, meaning that it's annoying. Pop-ups are a type of malware. Now, they're not going to kill our system by any means if we have one pop-up or advertisement. It's just going to get on our nerves. However, if we have 100,000 of them, it could definitely crash our system, and that becomes malicious. So there's different types of malware. You have spam in your email. You might have a virus, a Trojan horse, all kinds of things. Worms are considered malware. You might get nasty messages or advertisements being sent in to your instant message programs. We actually call that spam, which is probably a new word for you. But We have different types of malicious software that can attack not only our personal computers, but our business computers and even our whole network. So make sure that you're aware of those, and we're going to go into all the ways to prevent that from happening when we talk about our anti-malware, along with all the different kinds of viruses. And that will come in a different chapter. So you have made it through that one. And I want to just talk really quickly about taking a moment and preparing yourself for success. You have literally made it through 5 chapters of your book, of your slides, hopefully of your book too if you're reading and have your book already. But where are you going to apply all of this information? Well, first and foremost, probably to practice tests and then the real exam itself. But there's a layer beyond this. What's the purpose of doing all of this stuff? To get a job in IT or get a better job in IT, and all of that, again, where is it leading you to? Getting paid, making more money. And so one of the things I want to suggest that you do is get a LinkedIn profile if you don't have one already. That's my big tip outside of IT for this section of class. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, go create a LinkedIn profile. You can connect with IT professionals all around the world, staffing agencies, HR reps that might introduce you to your next job or give you the guidance and information necessary to have the most successful career. Feel free to connect with me. I'll actually put a link up in that corner, I think it might be over there, to my LinkedIn profile so that you can connect with me. And you can see our page on there as well and connect with other alumni and staff of IMIT. But make sure that you are using not only your digital network, but your human network to make yourself as successful as possible. Plus, when you get your certification here in the next few weeks, you're going to want to brag about it. And LinkedIn is the best place to brag about your brand new certification. So go back, study, read your book, spend some good time getting this information in, make your flashcards, and get ready for another test. I will see you soon.